Alright guys, I want to make sure to keep the series rolling, so I'm back for part 2 of Unfuck Your Cycle, where we're going to get into the basics. And for some of you guys who have already started considering performance-enhancing substances and maybe have done some research on the internet, it might seem a little overly basic for you. But I strongly encourage you to watch this anyway, because I think mastering the basics is the only way that you stand a chance of understanding what's going on in your body at a hormonal level, even a very, very high level. Because you got to think about how complicated our bodies are and how fucking with something very, very minor can have far-reaching consequences, right? As an example of this, just get like a bottle of aspirin and look at the potential side effects, right? To a very common, very safe drug that's been around forever, well, it can have all these deleterious effects that we don't totally understand depending on your own individual physiology. And that's really going to be a theme of this entire course, is just like with our training, you're trying to understand what works for you. But with this, it's like you're doing advanced calculus, and if you don't have the basics, if you don't have your arithmetic, your algebra, your trig, your geometry, whatever, you're just going to be so hopelessly lost you just give up, or you seriously fuck yourself up. So, let's get into it. Alright, so when most people think of performance-enhancing drugs, they're thinking mainly of anabolic steroids, or more specifically, androgenic anabolic steroids, AAS. We'll talk about that term a little bit later in a different video, but basically it's describing two different main effects of steroids. There's the anabolic effect, which refers to building muscle, and there's the androgenic effect, which refers to developing male sex characteristics, right? So we're talking about things like exacerbating male pattern baldness, potentially increasing acne, deepening voice, strength increasing, right? Harder, denser looking muscles, that sort of thing is typically more of an androgenic or androgynous, I'm sorry, not sure, effect of steroids. But performance-enhancing drugs is actually a term that encompasses more than that. So if we were to do a Venn diagram, it would look something like this. Alright, so we've got our PEDs, our PED circle, anabolic steroids are in there. Now if we were to draw the steroid cycle though, some of it's going to be outside. That's AS, that's all steroids, alright? So some steroids are not performance-enhancing drugs. So we're talking here about things like corticosteroids, right? Cortisone, which I got a cortisone shot in my knee, and I'll do a separate video on cortisone because, man, it gets just as bad a rap as anabolic steroids do. So there's some nuances to be made there. We go back to this PED circle, right? There's other substances that can go in here too. There's peptides. And again, some of that is going to be kind of outside the circle. So when we're talking about peptides, we're talking about, maybe you've heard something called BPC 500, which is a stomach peptide. It's made by your stomach, produced by your stomach or organs around your stomach, and it can stimulate healing of muscle cells. Okay? So that's an example. Again, lots and lots of different peptides that your body produces. Not all of them are going to be performance-enhancing ones. Another example of a peptide is the GHRP that we talked about in the appetite video from a while back, where Rob, owner of Big Text Gym, was talking about how he uses that peptide to increase the rate of his gastric emptying, right? So essentially his stomach processes food a little bit faster and makes him very hungry. So he can eat upwards of 8,000 calories a day. There's more that goes in here, right? So there's growth hormone. There's human growth hormone. Hopefully you're not injecting like bovine growth hormone or some shit like that. Why I put GH kind of both inside and outside the circle too, and that's for a third reason that I want to talk about, and that's the term performance enhancing. Okay, So, other things we put here, things like stimulants, right? Things like EPO, which Lance Armstrong was famous for using, which is a substance that increases your red blood cell count and therefore increases your endurance. So there's lots and lots of different PEDs, but again, because the media's kind of demonized these, we just lump them all together under the term anabolic steroids. Generally, right? So hopefully you make this distinction, or at least are aware of it, right? Because again, you gotta have the basics. And we're very much starting with arithmetic, but I very much believe that that's an important part. But let's go back to that GH thing, right? Where I said that, well, GH can have a performance enhancing effect, right? You've probably heard GH gut, which I kind of think is a myth, but regardless, GH is sometimes used by bodybuilders to increase the rate of fat loss or muscle growth or improve their sleep, lots of different functions, right? Well, all these things, or most of these things, were originally produced because in theory they have some medical benefit, right? We talked about that with testosterone the last time. I'm sure you're aware of it with GH, right? For people with dwarfism, when they're children, they can try and get GH injections so that they are able to grow to a height where they can function more normally with normal things. You've probably heard about celebrities using these things to improve their skin. Well, is that performance enhancing? There's a lot of different ethical arguments to be made here. And I want to point these ethical arguments out for another very basic reason. A lot of times when you're reading about steroids in the media, online, everyone's going to have an agenda because of how politicized these things are, right? And they're politicized because there's a lot of ethical issues kind of tied into these things. What is performance enhancing? What is normal? There was a great comment on the last video. It's like, well, why is it okay for 16-year-old girls to start taking female sex hormones as birth control, but it's not okay for adult men to take testosterone to improve their quality of life? Why is it okay that an individual who identifies as transgender can take these hormones to change an arguably normal biological function, normal in the sense that, it works, you're not broken or injured physically. Sorry if I went over the line there. But then it's not okay for a different adult male who identifies as a homo. Fuck, I'm screwing this up. I'm not the most politically correct guy. I'm sorry, y'all. You get my point, though. The point is, it's very difficult to draw the line of, okay, when are we enhancing performance? When are we enhancing quality of life? When are we doing something different? When are we restoring normal function? When all those things kind of get blurred, it makes it very, very difficult to get a clear view of what's going on, how dangerous are these drugs, so that you can evaluate safely and responsibly whether they're going to be beneficial for you, whether they're worth the risks that they involve. All right, so that kind of covers the big picture of the basics. I do want to get into the basic anabolic steroid, and that is testosterone. So if you guys don't already know, testosterone is the main male sex hormone. It produces most of your male sexual characteristics. I can thank my high level of testosterone for this full beard, and that is complete bullshit because I couldn't grow this shit until I was 30. But other male hormone issues that we talked about earlier, right? Deepening voice, that sort of thing. So all those, libido, all those kind of a main function of testosterone, keeping those in normal range. Well, if you go to get a blood test for your testosterone, normal range is considered anything from roughly 200 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. I think that's the measurement. And when you look at that number, hopefully something sticks out to you. Hopefully you realize it seems like a pretty broad range, doesn't it? Like the top is going to be 5 times the bottom. Wouldn't you feel a lot different with 200 nanograms of testosterone compared to 1,000? And the answer is yes, right? And the reason this is a normal range is because over the course of your life, your natural production of testosterone is going to decline. So it's going to be at its peak sometime around 18 to 25 years old. But then as you age past that, it gradually declines to the point where when you're 70 or 80 or 90, you're hopefully around this 200 range. Well, obviously, if you're 70 or 80 or 90 years old, you're not going to feel the same as you were when you were 25, even though you might want to, right? Well, these are where the ethical questions come in of, okay, well, when is your testosterone low enough to replace? You talk to most doctors, most general practitioners at least, and they're going to tell you, well, if it's outside this normal range, if it's below 200, even if you're 18, all right? But if you go talk to a doctor who maybe more specializes in that or is more open to the ethical issue of hormone replacement therapy, they're going to tell you, well, if you're not feeling kind of like yourself, if maybe your libido's dropping, if maybe you're seeing a weight gain that you didn't see when you were younger, maybe if you feel like you're getting older, you could benefit by supplementing testosterone. And that's very, very true. So why aren't more people just prescribed it if this sort of ladder doctor exists? Well, first of all, the ladder doctor is usually pretty fucking expensive. So that's unfortunate. Most people cannot afford it, and most insurance companies don't cover it as an issue because it's an ethical controversy and they can get away with not covering it. So you end up with, instead, you get prescribed things like antidepressants and weight loss pills and cholesterol medication and blah, 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 which, maybe could have arguably, some of those maybe could have been prevented with proper hormone replacement therapy. There is another issue, though, and I think it shouldn't be overlooked. This is one of the things, again, it goes back to those ethical issues. But because the issue is so charged, you're going to get a very polarized viewpoint. So either the article you're reading, probably very biased against steroid, is talking about how detrimental they can be. But if you're talking one in favor, it's probably very much in favor, and they're kind of shoving some of the side effects on the drug. I don't want to say that. Just minimizing the side effects or potential side effects and how very dangerous or disastrous they can be for quality of life. In the case of testosterone, if you're supplementing at these normal physiological levels, then your side effects are probably going to be very, very low if you have any at all. But once you start supplementing outside this range, right, which is what happens if you're using high levels of testosterone as a performance-enhancing drug, then you start to suffer consequences. And the main consequence from taking too much testosterone is that your body, seeking to get into some sort of homeostasis or balance, is going to convert some of this testosterone into estrogen through a process known as aromatization. So basically what happens is you inject a bunch of testosterone, your body takes it, it pumps it up past this 1000 level, your body kind of freaks out. It's like, oh shit, what do I do with all this crap? And so it changes some of it into estrogen. And then you start to suffer from estrogen-related side effects. That's a very bad thing because guys typically have very low levels of estrogen. Females have very low levels of testosterone. That's why there's a difference between the genders. But for guys, having high levels of estrogen can really suck. It can lead to things like loss of libido. It can lead to things like emotional mood swings, right? You feel like you're PMSing all the time. It can lead to things like acne. Of course, too low estrogen can also lead to things like acne. Too low estrogen can also lead to things like loss of libido and depression and all sorts of negative consequences. So when you start to mess around with your hormones, even at the most basic level, you can see how quickly things can get out of hand. And then when you think of the extremes that some people will go to in order to maximize their performance, I mean, you've probably read about Dallas McCarver, right? Whose autopsy showed that his level was 10,000. 10,000! Imagine how much fucking estrogen that guy would have in his body. So what bodybuilders do is then take drugs to control the estrogen. Well, the estrogen drugs, maybe that raises their cholesterol, so they take drugs to control the cholesterol. Pretty soon, they're just as bad as the guy who didn't get the HRT in the first place because they're on a whole cocktail of medications. Plus, they're morbidly obese on top of that. So you can see how all this stuff becomes A, very politically charged, B, very complicated, C, pretty hard to learn about because it's pretty complicated and because it's very politically charged. So I don't want to overload you guys just yet. The last thing I'm going to go back to is to talk about Dallas McCarver and that 10,000 level. A lot of people read that as, oh, holy shit, he was injecting 10 grams of testosterone into his body every week. That was like 10 different horse syringes or whatever. That's not the case, right? What you have to remember throughout this entire series is that everyone responds to stimulus differently. That includes training, that includes sleep, stress, everything, including your hormones. And so it's very possible that you take a very small amount of testosterone that's administered by your doctor, and this testosterone level skyrockets. And it's very possible that you take a very small amount of testosterone and you see almost no change in this testosterone level. So there's no way to prescribe one dose that works for everyone. Again, if you've started doing some research on your own and you've read, hey, I'm supposed to start at 500 milligrams of testosterone per week because that's the basic cycle, please forget that bullshit. You gotta find what works for you, unfortunately. The only way to do that safely is under a doctor's supervision. Okay? Because it's very possible that 500 milligrams is going to put you at the point where all of a sudden your estrogen's out of whack, you have no idea how to control it because you have no idea what the fuck you're doing in the first place. You start feeling miserable, you get whatever test flu, or you get, which is just a term people use to say when they're feeling shitty because they just took too much testosterone. Lots and lots of different negative side effects, and so starting in that way is probably a bad choice, in my opinion. I am never going to tell you guys what to do. I'm always going to tell you talk to the doctor, but chances are the doctor's going to start you out on a low dose. They're going to see how you respond, and they're going to adjust from there, just like you would with any other medication in the world, so that you can do it safely and really understand how your body responds, just like an unfucked program when we start at the most basic level, make those small changes. It's the only way. Otherwise, you end up down the road, you just don't know what's going on, and so you're taking whatever because you have no idea how it's going to affect you. You didn't learn in the first place. So hopefully this series at least introduces you. We're not done talking about testosterone. Trust me, there is a fuck ton more about this one hormone. And then you think of all the different anabolic steroids there are. Then you go back to our PDs, you think of all the different PDs there are. This is a whole can of worms that you're getting into if you decide to go this route and you're a competitive lifter, competitive physique athlete, whatever the case may be. I think that's about all I got. I know it was long-winded. I hope it wasn't too boring. I hope I didn't sound too preachy, because, I'm not immune to the fact that this is a charged issue. I certainly have my own strong opinions, and I don't mean to force those on you guys, all right? I want to be as open-minded as possible, so if I didn't do a good job of that, please let me know. If I did, please let me know, right? So I can keep doing more of it. I will see you next time. In the meantime, I'm going to try and get this fucking beard trimmed because it is now past the point where I can handle it on my own. Growing a life of its own. Pretty soon it's going to need a name. I'll see y'all later.